Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. The war with Iran is now just about 6 weeks old, and things are winding down. And many people are asking the question, what was this war really about? Well, first, let's look at what the president has said about it. President Trump said that initially we were attempting to destroy Iran's capacity to make nuclear weapons. Obviously, no one in their right mind wants a nuclear-armed Iran. According to many sources, Iran has over 440 kilograms of uranium. And this uranium has been enriched to the 60% level. Just for reference sake, nuclear power for civilian purposes only requires enrichment at the level of 2 to 5%. So the uranium that Iran has is enriched far beyond what it would need to be if it were true that it only wanted to use it for civilian power purposes. To build an efficient nuclear bomb, however, the uranium needs to be enriched to 90%, some of it at least. And Iran has continually been attempting to gain the capacity technologically to reach that level of enrichment. Even at 60%, however, enrichment, a crude nuclear weapon is possible. Last year, 2025, in Operation Midnight Hammer, the United States made major progress in destroying Iran's nuclear research and enrichment facilities. But even with the massive bomb that we dropped and the penetration of their underground facility, we didn't destroy it completely and utterly, despite what Donald Trump said. We didn't destroy the stockpile either of uranium. So since then, Iran has been constructing tunnels to get underneath the destroyed facility to access the material and the machines. And also that enriched uranium is located at other locations, not just where we struck in Operation Midnight Hammer. So that's number one, destroying Iran's nuclear capacity. Second, the president has said that Iran it needs to be dealt with because they're the number one state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And they have been for decades. They funnel hundreds of millions of dollars for recruitment, training, and supplying weapons to bloodthirsty terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas and several other organizations in the Middle East. And these organizations, we have to remember, Hezbollah and Hamas are not just spreading terror in the Middle East. They have cell groups and activities across Europe and Central and South America and even the United States and North America. So Iran has been attacking the United States, in a sense, and its allies around the world for decades through its terrorist proxy organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. At its inception in 1979, the Islamic State took 66 Americans hostage and held them for 444 days without cause, without crime, without any justification for doing so. And just 4 years later, in 1983, an Iranian-backed suicide bomber attacked United States Marines in Beirut, Lebanon, killing 241 people. In recent years, Iranian-backed terrorism has killed hundreds of people. Here's some examples. In October 2023, Iran-backed Hamas terrorists killed over 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, when they invaded Israel. And they kidnapped at least 12 Americans on that same day and hundreds of Israelis. December of 2023, Iran-backed militias wounded 3 United States service members in an attack at Erbil Air Base in Iraq. January 2024, the Iran-backed Kataib Hezbollah terrorists killed 3 U.S. service members and wounded more than 40 other service members in a drone attack against the Tower 22 military base in Jordan. Between October 23, November 24, Iran and its proxies conducted more than 180 attacks against U.S. forces in the Middle East, wounding more than 180 service members and killing 3 service members. So for decades now, for literally 5 decades, we have been at an undeclared war with Iran in the sense of terrorism. We've grown so accustomed to Iranian-backed terror that these events no longer shock us, and they barely even make major headlines anymore. But thankfully, we have a president now who is taking action to bring this to a halt. Well, the third reason for the war in Iran is to rescue the Iranian people from a savage, bloodthirsty regime that regularly tortures and kills thousands of its own people. We've interviewed here on Truth and Liberty several Iranians, including Mohammad Faridi and Pastor Reza Safa, former Iranians, now Americans, who confirmed to us the abuse committed by the Islamic government on its own people. Before America's attacks just a few weeks ago, there were demonstrations in the streets of Iran, especially Tehran, and Iran, in response, murdered 40,000 of its own people. Imagine that. There's no such thing as civil rights in Iran. There is no freedom at all to voice disagreement or opposition to the Islamic government. There are no free elections. There's no freedom of religion. Women especially are raped, imprisoned, and beaten without cause every day. While we may not be able to rescue every nation who has a brutal dictator by, taking military action, when that nation is also openly attacking the United States and its allies, a military response is appropriate. And when we do respond, certainly a response that is sufficient to destroy the tyrannical and abusive regime is justified. The fourth reason for this war in Iran is that Iran is in an axis of evil, literally, with China and Russia. They're the three main connection points in an axis designed to destroy the influence of the United States in the world and to take out of the world a unipolar system where the United States is the dominant power and the sole superpower, and instead to impose, well, on its face, they would say, a multilateral or a multipolar system with multiple sources of power and influence. But really, behind the scenes, it's just another superpower with China pulling all the strings. China, Russia, and Iran are allied against the United States to destroy us. This is a plain fact. Several years ago, China adopted a policy of trade with America. This is in the 1990s. We opened up trade with China, one of the dumbest things, if I can be so blunt, that America has ever done. And I remember at the time, the politicians, the Republicans in control of Congress, saying, yeah, we need to open up free trade with China in order that they could see how good it is to be capitalist, and then they'll be converted to freedom. How ridiculous, right? But that's what we did. And over the last 30 years, we, America, have been building Chinese society and the Chinese military. This open trade with America has been the engine that has fueled the buildup of the largest military in the history of the world. Now, they have a larger army than America, and increasing nuclear weapons stockpile, and now they even have a presence in outer space. So China has also been engaged in what's called, in a diplomatic, I say diplomatic, it's really not diplomacy, you'll understand that later in the show, but a diplomatic initiative called the Belts and Roads Initiative, where they have spent hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions, building infrastructure in third world countries in exchange for loyalty to China and diminished influence of the United States. Our guest today is going to explain that it's actually not just sort of like loyalty. It's actually an unpayable debt that these nations now owe to China. And they know that if they don't stay loyal to China, China can so-called foreclose and basically take over their country. So China has actively sought to undermine American election security and has infiltrated the United States of America with a large and effective spy and actually government network. Do you remember reading a few years ago about secret Chinese police stations in our major cities? China has supported the Iranian military and funded its regime by purchasing massive amounts of Iranian oil. China has secretly instigated military conflicts around the world, including the Ukraine and many other places, in order to tie up the American military and drain our resources. So there's much more to be said about the Iranian-China connection. But there is no question that taking out the Islamic dictatorship of Iran and installing a peaceful pro-American government in Iran would be a major blow to China's global strategy. The Islamic radicals in Iran want global Sharia, that's Sharia law all over the world. The communists in China want global communism, with China as the governing superpower. Both need the United States and Israel to be eliminated to get us out of the way. Now, a few weeks ago, we had on our show Pastor Reza Safa, and he said that really Islam and communism, they're natural bedfellows, because the economy, if you will, the economic system of communism is really the same as the economic system of Islam. They're both gangster-style, mafia-style economy, criminal operations designed to reward the elite who are in power and hold the rest of the people down in bondage to be those who feed the upper class or the elite. And this we can see is true. This is why the mullahs of Iran have no problem calling China, a supposedly secular state, to be their number one friend or number one ally in the world, even though China is actively persecuting Muslims more than any other country in the world in the western provinces of their nation. So folks, I've invited a special guest on today's program. It's Joshua Philipp. He's an award-winning journalist and the senior investigative reporter at the Epoch Times. He's the head, or he also leads the Josh Philipp Show and another program called Crossroads. He has written and investigated extensively concerning China and their globalist ambitions and the Chinese Communist Party. And he's here today to talk about China's plans for literally world domination. I'm not a conspiracy theorist here. I'm not, trying to stoke alarmist fears. What we're trying to do here on Truth and Liberty is bring you the analysis and the information that you can't get from other places that's actually rooted and grounded in truth. So Josh Philipp's groundbreaking documentary regarding COVID, for example, COVID-19, garnered over 75 million views. And while many believe that COVID was, even at the time, believed that it was something more than just a random disease, Josh's documentary completely exposed the role of the Chinese Communist Party in the manufacture and dissemination of the deadly virus. So Josh also takes a deep dive into the influence and strategies of the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party, on global politics and other affairs. So we're super glad and excited and honored to have Josh Philipp as our guest today on Truth and Liberty. So don't go away. We're going to take a minute or so, share some exciting information with you, and then we'll be right back after that. Before we take the break, though, I want to personally remind you that the Truth and Liberty Awards Banquet is coming up on May the 1st, and it's going to be an awesome evening. You want to be sure to get your tickets now. We're going to be honoring David Barton for his lifetime contribution to the restoration of America's Christian heritage. David Barton is an American treasure, and he's going to be receiving the Samuel Adams Award for courageous Christian leadership. We're so excited to be able to honor him in that way. Also, we're going to be recognizing former Mesa County, Colorado election clerk Tina Peters. Tina is currently serving a 9-year sentence in Colorado prison at the age of 71 years old because she dared to make a copy, if you will, of a hard drive on an election machine in her county in order to fulfill her obligations under both state and federal law to preserve election records for 24 months. You see, because the Colorado Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, had mandated that every county clerk in the state come in and let her do what she called a trusted build, which basically would wipe out thousands and thousands of election records, right, in January 2021. And we all know what happened in January 20. So, folks, we're going to honor Tina. She didn't do everything right in the way that she did it, but we want to recognize her courage and her love of country and her contribution to restoring truth to America's elections. All right, don't go away. We'll be right back in just a minute, and then we'll be joined with Josh Phillips from the Epoch Times.
Darkness has attacked our nation, but God is raising a standard. Now is the time to wake up and shine the light across America and around the world. Believers are fighting back, eyes are opening, hearts are changing, and Christ is being proclaimed. In government, education, family, media, and the church, we are mobilizing to engage culture with truth. Go to truthandliberty.net.
Welcome back, everybody, to Truth and Liberty. And as I said, our special guest today is Josh Phillips, award-winning investigative journalist and the senior investigative reporter for the Epoch Times. Josh, thanks for coming on Truth and Liberty today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, Josh, you're through your years of experience and your training and everything else that you've devoted yourself to, you're really an expert on, I think, global politics, but especially China. And I'd love to just dive right in with you today on this, what's happening with the United States and Iran, because I think, and I'm sure you would agree with this, that China plays a big factor in what President Trump has done there with Iran. So I want to just start things off by asking, I've heard it said that China, Iran, and Russia, and you might be able to throw one or two other countries in there, but it really is a modern axis of evil. Do you agree with that kind of assessment?
Very much so, and that's how they regard it also. China, Russia, and Iran they're kind of the leaders of the global system. And this is also deeply tied in with their war plans. It's deeply tied in with how they maintain the networks of subversion they've already established. Already at this point controlling most of Latin America, most of Asia, and most of the Middle East, or the middle countries, with the exception really of like Western Europe. Right now, as we speak, most of the world, Africa as well, is under the kind of the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, especially, and to an extent, factions within or elements within Russia and Iran. It's a very different way of understanding the picture of the world.
Yeah, I think we need to unpack this a little bit because in America, we tend to get pretty isolated in terms of our understanding of what's going on around the world. And, I remember, I'm sure you do, but in the 1990s and 89, of course, when the Soviet Union fell, and then in the early 90s, or 89 when the Berlin Wall, and then the early 90s when the Soviet Union fell, we were told this is the end of communism, and the U.S. is now the sole superpower in the world. I remember even then going, hey, wait a second, there's this gigantic country a little bit south called China. What are we going to do about that? And here we are, 30 years later, and it is our number one global enemy. And so when you say that there are networks of subversion, what has China been doing these 30 years while we've been enjoying the delusion of being the only global superpower?
Well, I think to understand this, we first need to discuss what it means to control a country, because this is a very different vision of what it means to conquer. For the United States, when we think of conquering, we think rolling in with your tanks. You put your flag over their Capitol building, and you suddenly you're putting the leader in charge of the country, or you're trying to remake it, kind of like what we tried to do in Afghanistan. Maybe didn't work out so well for us. Kind of what we tried to do in Afghanistan. We think of that as conquering. For the Chinese Communist Party, it's very different. And this applies to their other factions as well. You can conquer a country through non-military means. Now, I think a Western comparison to this strategy would be Machiavellianism. How do you control a country effectively using a mafia state? So a lot of my research has been, going back to 2008 as an investigative reporter, a lot of my research has been into what's called the United Front Work Department. It's a branch of the Chinese government, and effectively they run networks overseas. Jamestown Foundation finally, 20 years on almost, you're seeing studies come out on this. Finally, I've been talking about it for a long time. They did a study recently. They found over 1,000 of these front organizations in the United States, over 500 in Canada, and they're basically in every country. These are the unofficial government of the Chinese Communist Party on foreign soil, operating in New York City, operating in San Francisco, operating in Texas, operating in just about every major U.S. state. You have tongs. They're called tongs, like fraternal organizations of every type of major business: student tongs, oil worker tongs, government tongs. You have visiting professor tongs. You have hometown association tongs. Everything. Some have thousands of members. Some have 10,000s of members. And what they do is they work with the Chinese consulates and what they call liaison work, also tied in with the political warfare departments of the Chinese military, which formerly it was called the political. It was actually called the General Political Department. They renamed it a few years back. I can't remember the new name for it. But what they do is they try to conquer countries through unconventional means. And what they refer to this as is taking over the civil society. Now, this model of what it means to take over the civil society is what it means to conquer, what it means to conquer a country. And the thinking is this: you have the actual technical government of a country. When we wage war and when we do like nation building, that's what we're going after. When people say, well, did Trump really overthrow Venezuela? No, not by the standards we'd use for like Iraq or Afghanistan. But if you understand taking over the civil society, yes, he did. It's a completely different way of understanding nation conquering. The civil society is this: it is your business leaders, your economy, your GDP. It's your politicians. It's your news outlets, your influencers, your TikTokers, your YouTubers, your news hosts, the people who are the ideological leaders of a country. It's your college professors. It's the ones who are educating the youth, the ones who are building the next generation. It's even entertainment, Hollywood in our case. The Chinese Communist Party, what they try to do is control this. And so if you control business, investment, politics, entertainment, news outlets, whether it be actual, major news outlets or even just influencers, you effectively control the country. You control their economy, you control their ideology, and you control their politics. That is what you would achieve with a successful invasion and nation building up of nations. And the other thing they do for this is they use debt. They use a few different methods for it. One is bribery, blackmail, honey traps, getting people involved in like sex scandals and things like that to blackmail them. A lot of it is inviting people over to China. They literally, in some countries like Africa, they do what they call castle diplomacy. They build them castles as bribery. A lot of this is done through the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yep.
Which has an element of debt trap policies built into it, basically just extreme usury. And so what they do is they'll go into countries, they'll bring, let's say, $1 million, 100,000, 10% roughly, 100,000 in that case would be just for bribes. They'll pay off the politician, pay off the decision makers, get them to clear the way, and they get effectively the ability to build infrastructure in the countries. It is designed on a predatory loan system that is designed to default. And when they default, they then gain control over key GDP elements, whether it be rare earth minerals, oil, timber, other key elements of like the local economy. And wow. By doing that, they start to control the actual GDP. And if you look at the way that works, if you control natural resources, you control the factories, you control the politics, you control the country. They've done really this all like, throughout Latin America.
It really is like the mafia controlling a neighborhood, right? A loan shark.
They do that too.
You go in.
Yeah, they do that too directly.
Pay us for protection, quote unquote, and then you end up owning them. That's really amazing.
Yeah, so there's multi-tiers to this. Yeah. So they've used this kind of debt trap strategy all throughout Africa, all throughout Latin America, all throughout Asia, in some parts of Europe. They've even done it to an extent in the United States. A lot of people don't know that actually the largest foreign investor in the United States is China. It's China.
Yeah.
But they also use mafia tactics. There's what I called weaponized corruption. And this is also a different way of understanding like drug cartels, gangs. In China, you have the snakeheads, for example, human traffickers. You have the triads, which work under the United Front. They actually operate under the Tongs. There's a way you can actually control countries through corruption. And think of it like this. In a lot of parts of Latin America, you cannot get elected to government if you say you're going to fight the cartels. They kill you. If you don't work with the cartels, they kill you. And so, what does it mean if the political system is ruled by people who have to work with the cartels, if not being part of it, at least tolerating it? It means your country is controlled by corruption, basically. In Mexico, for example, there are entire communities, a lot of the rural areas. The government is the cartels, the schools are the cartels, the hospitals are the cartels. The local economy is the cartels. Remittances in many parts of Latin America are, basically mostly, like, 25, 30% of their GDP. If you can control a country through corruption, whoever controls the corruption controls the country. And when you talk about the Chinese element with the cartels, what are they doing? They're supplying the precursor ingredients, not just, we talk fentanyl, which also comes from China. They supply precursor chemicals for methamphetamine, every major drug. They do the money laundering for the cartels. They run the ports. They do the shipments. And also tying with Iran, you have a lot of narco terror involvement. A lot of money for terrorism goes through there. It's why post 9/11, all the ad campaigns where, if you smoke pot, you're supporting terrorism. Do you remember that? It's because it's tied in with it. There's a form of weaponized corruption, and these factors have worked together to allow the CCP capturing the civil society, creating corruption, controlling that corruption. And not to mention just diplomatic warfare, controlling actual politicians and just puppeteering entire countries.
Yeah.
Most of the world is taken over by them. Most of the world is in their system already.
So that's an incredible description of world politics. It's sobering. Let's talk about Iran for a minute. So by the time this program airs, the United States will have been in an undeclared war with Iran, military, live bullets, if you will, for about 5 weeks, 6 weeks, somewhere in that vicinity. And I'd like to get your perspective on really what this war was all about. So at its outset, Donald Trump was saying things like, we've got to stop their nuclear program. He's saying things like, he did mention regime change at the time. And then terrorism, of course, was sort of on the list, but not really. But I assume I understand there's a major connection between China and Iran. And was this war really about that connection more than anything else?
Yeah, a few parts with this in terms of what Iran represents. First of all, the real threat of Iran is not nuclear. The threat of Iran is subversion. They run global terror networks. They're kind of the puppeteers of global terrorism. They use this as an ideological kind of foothold within the entire Middle East region. They've used this as a type of subversion even into Western countries, Western Europe especially, but even the United States now. In Latin America, you have actual Hezbollah political parties. Like Hezbollah has official political parties. They have huge presence, very active presence in Brazil. Like, we think of this as like a terrorist organization, which they are, but they're a real, like, surface level political power in many countries, including right at our doorstep. Going back 10 years, I had good sources telling me that even in Mexico, even in Tijuana, right across the U.S.-Mexico border, you had Hezbollah training camps, Hezbollah training camps in Mexico. I was told at the time they were even working with the cartels. They were teaching them techniques for tunnel building, which is a little more complicated than some people I realized. They were working on them with that. They were also teaching them how to build IEDs, improvised explosive devices, which we now see the cartels using to, drop bombs from drones on people's heads. If you look at the bigger picture of it, this is also kind of a way to keep footholds in other countries. Lebanon, for example, Hezbollah is a key political power, like a major political power. Even in countries that are pretty well against terrorism, the ideological hold within the different camps of Islam, Iran leads a good part of that. And so you have the world of Islam divided into two real halves, like in terms of religious camps. And one of those is heavily under Saudi Arabia. The other one is under Iran. And that global system of terrorism tied in with drugs and everything else is a camp of power. And so Iran, to an extent, influences, terror networks, Muslim networks throughout Latin America, throughout Africa, throughout Asia. But they're also kind of the foothold the CCP has by extension, them and Pakistan in the Middle East. Russia works as kind of a factor to control the former Soviet bloc, but also Western Europe to an extent, which Trump warned them about. He told them, look, if you guys go full green, you're going to be dependent on Russia for your energy, and they're going to control you through your energy. And then that's true. They have, like, they're all talking about evil Putin right now, but they're buying oil from him.
Yeah.
And China controls most of Asia. A lot of the Asian region is in their camp, but also the heavy political control. Also, in addition to these other factors, all throughout Latin America and all throughout Mecca, all throughout Latin America and all throughout Africa. And so Iran is part of the triad for this. And I would also add one more thing. I talked about the threat of Hezbollah being one of the big threats in the systems of control, but actually the IRGC is a huge threat also. And when we talk about Iranian sleeper cells, it doesn't look like some crazy guy ramming his car into a gate and opening fire on US troops. It looks like a gang assassination. It looks like some street thug having a botched robbery and a major politician gets killed. That's what assassination looks like. And key, just to back this up, we know of 2 Iranian attempted assassination plots that got foiled. One was right here in New York City. I'm in actually Jersey, but across the water. In Queens, you actually had an Iranian activist, right, a person against the regime, and there was an Iranian hit job against him. And the way it was working was, Iranian intelligence had hired an Eastern European mafia to carry out an assassination. Mm-hmm. They were doing the same thing in Washington, D.C. And so assassinations or sleeper cells don't necessarily look like some crazy, radical terrorist. It looks like crime. Yeah. It looks like normal crime.
Right, to hide their fingerprints on it. Well, so the thing in this short war with Iran, and I say that based on historical experience, but that has been kind of conspicuous to me is China's silence and their lack of not just objection, but they haven't done anything that I know of. Why haven't they opposed this more?
I think the Chinese Communist Party is trying to bank on the divisions within American politics. And so, there's a Maoist strategy where if you can unite minority factions, you can create a majority. And I think what they believe is that anti-Israel is the thing they can bank on to unite the far right and the far left into a third party. Which is why if you look at all the Chinese propaganda on the internet, it's all about Israel and America working for Israel. And that's like all of their propaganda right now. I think what they're betting on is that the far right would probably vote for Imam Dami if it was based on a strong anti-Israel stance. And if you had someone come in saying, I'm going to make houses affordable and we're not going to get, we're going to disengage from foreign politics, which is what the CCP really wants. They want American disengagement from the global politics.
They like Tucker Carlson, I guess.
Yeah, anti-interventionism. That's what they want.
Uh-huh. And so this Iran war, though, the nuclear weapons, they have a stockpile of enriched uranium. It's not fully weapons grade yet, but your belief is that this conflict was really not ever about nuclear weapons. How is, without regime change in the sense of taking out the Iranian government, allowing the son of the Shah of Iran to come in and set up a new government, how are we any better off by this conflict?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the kind of hard lesson of American interventionism also. Is a fair argument is where have we been successful with that? Our eyes typically go to, of course, Iraq, Afghanistan. I will say, and people don't give enough credit to it, Iraqi regime change might have been successful. Afghanistan, no, obviously not. The Taliban controls it, but I think Trump is even trying to recognize them as a political power. We can talk about Libya, for example, and the overthrowing of Gaddafi. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? That hasn't affected us too much, but there's different arguments on that. And we could also look at Syria, when you had, of course, the whole uprisings taking place, right? The Arab Spring, they used to call it, right? Overthrowing the governments throughout those regions. Syria is a good example of this. You have a guy leading the country. He used to be on a terror watch list. Who's kind of being brought to heel. I think what Trump is starting to realize is this: most of the world is corrupt. Frankly, you're not going to put a clean politician in power anywhere. It's a hard reality. Okay, like
even in Washington,
can we name
DC.
a single government? Can we name a single government through all of human history that did not have problems of corruption? It's a human problem. And so you're not going to put a clean government into place. You have to tolerate to an extent and learn to work with the problems they have, but try to balance that with American values and what we represent in terms of diplomacy, which is, represent some degree of human rights. In America, kind of our standard is, well, basically freedom of belief and freedom of speech. Beyond that, you do you. If you want to be a little corrupt, you do you. But freedom of speech, freedom of belief. I think these are the two standards we can kind of enforce as the American-led system. And you can't really ask a whole lot more for most governments. Even that is a hard bet, even for Western Europe, frankly. And so I think Trump is understanding that you can get pretty radical groups in charge in these countries, and that's kind of what you need. If you have a nation of wolves, you can't have a sheep leading them. Like, you need to have somebody who's kind of a bit mean, frankly. People kind of necessitate the form of government they get to a weird extent. If you have a people who are extremely radicalized, you need to have someone in charge who can deal with them. And so I think Trump understands that maybe the son of the Shah of Iran, people say the Shah was a tyrant. I know there's different arguments on that because, frankly, which government of Iran was not like that? Let's be honest with ourselves. You could say he was maybe less bad, but it's oftentimes choosing the least of the available evils.
Yeah,
and that's the way it works.
Well, and so the Islamic government of Iran stays in power. How do we convert that, or what's Trump's strategy, in your opinion, for converting that to break this triad that you're talking about, to rein in this multilateralism and China?
So this ties into a different way of understanding Iran. In America, we tend to understand Iran as a religious extremist government. In the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party, it is not. They're using religion as a form of government power. This ties into what was called it was called the Egyptian model of Islam, basically merging socialism with Islam. Mm-hmm. And using the protections of, if you criticize the religion, they kill you, mm-hmm. as a way to guard the regime itself. This goes back to Sayyid al-Qutb, who wrote a book, I believe, called In the Footsteps of Islam, or In the Footsteps of the Quran. And what he did was, he was a radical communist in Egypt, I believe, early 1900s, I want to say, or late 1800s, early 1900s, and basically was using this model to spread all throughout the Arab region. Now, when people say, well, geez, yeah, they're a bunch of radical Islamists. Yeah, they are. They use it for political power, but do they actually believe in it? But let's look at this, okay? Why does Iran hate Israel? Is it because Israel is being accused of killing Muslims? Well, that's the narrative. But if that's the case, why does Iran regard the Chinese Communist Party as its closest ally, when the Chinese Communist Party is the greatest persecutor of Muslims in the known world? They use them as slaves. The Muslim Uyghurs are slaves in China. Almost the entire cotton industry is Muslim slaves. The entire garment industry, for the most part, is Muslim slaves. Why is it they don't call them out for organ harvesting, for crushing, what used to be East Turkestan, now known as, it was Xinjiang? Why don't they criticize that if this is about religion? The simple answer is it's not about religion. It's not about religion for Iran. It's not about Islam for Pakistan. It's not about Islam for Indonesia. It's not about Islam for any Muslim country. It's about politics and social control and using the garbs of religion as a form of protecting a government using religious fanaticism. It's as simple as that. And so I think Trump understands that this is not about religion; it's about politics, and it's about international allegiances. And if he can switch the international allegiances and bring Iran into kind of a global, more peaceful faction, I think he wants to have Saudi Arabia kind of work as the leader of that world, so to speak. Then you don't have to have regime change. You don't have to do nation building. You don't have to do any of that. You can work with them as partners. They can keep the illusion going for their people, and you don't have to deal with the messy realities of trying to change the regime. Because what you deal with then are like the super patriots, the brainwashed masses, the people who drink the punch, so to speak, the people who look at those political leaders and actually believe, that they're like, the mouth of God or something like that, when they're not. They're politicians. They're politicians using religion as tools.
Well, you may have alluded to this before we actually went on the air here, Josh, but the Venezuela situation, Trump took out just Maduro and his wife, and you were saying he left in place pretty much all the other officials and power brokers in the country. Is that an example of somehow what you're talking about? I'm not quite sure I follow how that is going to produce a better result for us in the long run, but maybe you can explain that.
Okay, so here's the reality again. You don't have governments without corruption.
Yeah.
It's just it's the hard reality. Can we name a single government in all of Latin America that is not at least influenced by the cartels? There was this big controversy recently where Trump pardoned one of the national leaders in Latin America. I can't remember which country exactly, but he pardoned one of the leaders in Latin America, and the guy is a literal cartel like figurehead.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, geez, why would Trump pardon this national leader? Why is that? It's because Trump understands something important, which is basically they're all like that. They're all like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you another example. When Trump was running for office, 2024 campaign trail, and he was talking about his operations he was planning for Latin America, what did he say? He said, we're going to use the entire military to go after the cartels. And he went for I believe the video was like 40 minutes, and he probably spent about 20 minutes just listing off all the military assets we're going to be using to go after the cartels. Effectively, everything we're doing now: naval blockades, special operations forces strikes, economic actions, military intelligence, working on locating them, working with regional partners. And then what did he say? Trump said something very interesting. He said, any government that tries to stop us, we will expose their connections to the cartels. Any official, any person. And what does that mean? Trump knows something. All of these government officials, you do not get into political power in those countries without connections to the cartels.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. And so I think when Trump did a regime change, which he kind of did but didn't, he actually used a very interesting method with this in Venezuela. He just took out Maduro.
Yeah.
He took out the figurehead, and he kept in, that was about taking out the cartel of the Suns. Well, who is the cartel of the Suns? It's the Venezuelan military, meaning almost all the generals, and it's the Venezuelan government, meaning most of the remaining government. They're all still in place. He kept them all in place. But he changed their policies by using business, diplomacy, and diplomatic requirements. What are the requirements? If they want their oil back, he said they have to push out China, Russia, and Iran.
Oh.
And the way I view this is that's what Trump is doing. He's understanding these countries are effectively all compromised, and there is a kind of undercurrent of an international battle for global systems. Who controls the global world order? Is it China and what they call the multipolar world order, or is it the United States and what we used to call the Pax Americana, but what they now refer to as the unipolar world order? Which is it? America has not been active on the global scene like this since the Cold War, and there's arguments on how well we handled that. But I think Trump is understanding this is the picture. We stepped back from it, and they took over the world effectively using these subversive methods, and we're taking it back now.
So let's talk about China. Just one question. I'd like to know your thoughts on the Chinese economy, and is it prospering, and or are they facing some real trouble?
The Chinese economy is a Ponzi scheme. Any China watcher who's not compromised by the CCP will tell you this. It's a Ponzi scheme. Their businesses, normally if you're a publicly traded company, yeah, you're up for audits. The CCP blocks them for audits. Every time they are audited, it turns out the company is a literal Ponzi scheme. The Chinese economy is divided into a few things. There's the real estate. The way they used to do this was mega projects, these ghost cities, airports in the middle of nowhere, highways, high-speed trains going to nowhere, what they call tofu buildings, buildings so fragile you can take your thumb and stick it through the wall. It's a big charade. It's a giant Potemkin village. But that was part of their economic program. They used mass loans and they do mega projects. The thinking is when you do that, you pump money into the economy. If you take $100 million from a bank and you give it to a developer and a local government, the thinking is that creates jobs. The money flows within the economy. People spend it. And it kind of doesn't leave. You tax it at every turn. The money goes right back. And that's how you create wealth. That was their economic theory. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because of graft. Every single layer, someone is stealing money, stealing some cream off the top. Because they're putting money in like real estate, in diamonds and gold outside of China, because they all know the economy is a Ponzi scheme. And because a lot of people there, when they get money, because they've been through, so many different weird social movements that they never feel safe, they sit on it. They don't spend it. So that failed. They replaced a lot of that with the Belt and Road Initiative, where effectively they're doing that outside of China, mega projects, which is also why they want money flowing within their pockets, which is why they require all the construction being done and being run afterwards by Chinese companies, right? They just exported that model. And again, they bribe officials into getting bad deals. It's how they do it. That's like a third of their economy. That whole thing right now is belly up, like just crashed, like gone.
Wow.
Another roughly third of their economy was manufacturing. COVID kind of ruined that for China. A lot of businesses, even without tariffs and other things, which are putting a big damper on that now, a lot of businesses are already pulling out of China because it was too risky to be dependent on them when they were shutting down ports and shutting everything down. And now they even have it in China where they have anti-espionage laws. And what does that mean? If you question the GDP, they can kill you for being a spy.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where it's at. And then the other roughly third is just local business, which also isn't doing well because there's no inflow and the tariffs are affecting all that. The economy is a giant Ponzi scheme.
Is this another situation where maybe Donald Trump knows stuff that the news media doesn't know, or at least won't pay attention to? Because he's taken a pretty hard stand against China, with tariffs and everything else like that. Does he know that they don't really have the financial resources to do what they are ostensibly threatening to do with military action and these other things?
Trump understands the weakness of the CCP. Let's put it this way. The strength of the Chinese Communist Party is not military. They're roughly less powerful than Russia. And we saw how well Russia performed against Ukraine.
Wow, that's
They're
quite a
roughly
statement.
less powerful than Russia. Military capabilities, they can't even build fighter jets. They buy the engines from Russia. There's a big scandal right now. Their fifth-generation fighter jet, they allegedly killed the guy because the entire thing was a big sham. It was fake. It was never that. And not only that, but it's a death trap. Anybody flying it's dying, apparently. Xi Jinping himself allegedly even had the guy who did that program killed recently, by the way. Their military is a paper tiger. It's for show. The real strength of the CCP is in subversion, the United Front. That is it's external, not internal. But Trump also understands a hard reality for the CCP. A lot of their power comes from money. The external power is all monetary. It's all personal financial interest, bribery, blackmail, business deals, economic things, controlling GDPs in other countries. It's all about money, all about money.
Well,
a big slogan in China is this. They say there'd be no new China without the CCP. And they're paying TikTokers and YouTubers going to China to go film, the buildings with shiny lights, and they're all, acting like moths, being like, wow, what bright, shiny lights. Now, the reality is modern China was not built by the CCP. Modern China was built by the reforms and opening up where they brought in Western manufacturing and Western investment. The
Right.
United States kind of built the new China.
Yeah.
You take away that money, the whole thing's going to go back. The whole thing's going to collapse. And Trump knew this because we could look back 2019, 2020 with his trade war with Xi Jinping at the time, before COVID and international lockdowns, which the CCP pushed for through the World Health Organization when their economy was collapsing. He knew the CCP would collapse effectively, or at least wouldn't have the power it has in terms of international influence, because again, the military is a paper tiger. They wouldn't have the power without the money. And so you take away the money, the power goes away too.
Yeah. Well, so Josh, with just a few minutes left in the show, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about the subject of elections and election integrity with you. And it was revealed recently that there was a NSA CIA report that was withheld from the public back in 2021 or so, showing that China did attempt to hack American election systems in the 2020 election. Do you have any, that probably does not shock you or surprise you at all. Is this something that if we had our eyes open, we should have known a long time ago?
Yes, that was a very big deal. So you're referring to a declassified report that came out, and it says that China was accessing effectively voter data. And that would give them something interesting, because what do you use voter data for? Well, you want to know who are your registered voters. You want to know the names of people. Why is that valuable? Because if you wanted to do something like, for example, try to falsify votes, maybe printing out fake IDs and shipping them and then using those to register to vote or voting, you could use that kind of data for that. Now, what's really interesting to me is that there were 3 different tiers of evidence, all of which were never connected, but all of which were hidden from Trump and from even within the U.S. government at the time. I believe even key members in the Trump administration were not even informed of it. So the 2 main pieces of evidence are this. There's the one we mentioned, where the CCP had breached voter data, which could be used to, again, get access to names. There was also another hidden report that was hidden from Trump, hidden from the President of the United States. And the stated reason in the Intel report that you mentioned, the stated reason was that they didn't like Trump, basically. They didn't like Trump's policies. And so it was an anti-Trump motivation for keeping that hidden from the President of the United States, a direct threat and breach of our election systems. Yeah. And that was a big deal because the British had the same thing and they freaked out with it. In the UK, it was regarded as a major breach of the integrity of their elections. And it was not treated the same here because it was hidden from the president.
Wow.
The other key piece of evidence is this. The FBI had somebody come in. This was also hidden. Kash Patel found it. They declassified it as well. Hidden from Trump. They said the Chinese Communist Party had a plan to rig our elections, according to this hidden document, right? And this is what they say. This is what they're saying, not me. They said the Chinese Communist Party was planning to print false driver's licenses, falsified driver's licenses, ship those here, and then use those to get ballots and then vote in our election. That was hidden from the president. So you had them hacking the system to steal the data, a stated plan to use that data or data like that to print these fake IDs and then to rig our elections. Then what else happened? The U.S. government actually did seize a shipment of fake driver's license coming from China at that time.
I have not heard this.
So you had 3 tiers of evidence: hacking with the use of this, stated intent to use it to do it, and then evidence of them trying to do exactly what they said they were going to do. And none of this was ever connected. And the 2 key pieces of evidence on this that would give the motivation and the evidence were hidden from the president. That's a huge deal.
That is huge. Well, how big was this shipment of driver's licenses? Do you have any information on that?
I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head, but it was pretty significant.
Okay. Well, we also in the recent weeks have heard about in Virginia, in I think it was Loudoun County. It may have been another one of the Northern Virginia counties, but there was over 1,000 non-citizens were removed from the voter rolls, and they were removed because they self-reported themselves, which raises the massive question of how many non-citizens are not reporting themselves and are on there and are actually voting. Because we've been told now for 6 years, no, this is not a real problem. You don't have, illegal immigrants voting in American elections. But it sounds like we really don't know who's voting in our elections. Do you have any information on that situation?
I think that needs to be investigated, but I will say one thing. If you're an illegal alien and you can't vote, and then suddenly 3 ballots show up in your mailbox from people who used to live at your address, and you're given the ballots, and there's universal mail-in ballots, and there's ballot drop boxes which are anonymous, and if anybody records you can sue them, which you saw happen. What is the incentive to vote if one party is saying we're going to give you free housing and free food and free services and free healthcare and free everything, and your kids can become citizens, and we'll give them free stuff too, and the other party's saying we're going to deport you? What are you going to do? When I lived in New York, in Jackson Heights at that time, which is Ocasio-Cortez's district, AOC's district, that was where they had MS-13 kill somebody on the subway platform, was one of the big stories. I lived in that neighborhood. I got 3 ballots at my address that were not mine. Mm-hmm. And so while we could say the problem of people registering to vote and voting is a big deal, I'd say the problem of counties and cities and so on not clearing their voter rolls so that you have ballots being sent out. Because again, the way universal mail-in ballots worked is they just gave ballots to everybody who was registered, whether you were dead, whether you moved, whether anything. Not to mention the fact that in California, New York, and a few other places, there's no question on, are you a citizen if you want to get a driver's license?
Right.
And when you get a driver's license, there's an anonymous push, well, not anonymous, but there's a push the button. Do you want to register to vote or not? Are you a citizen?
Right.
And it's your choice to say it. There's no real security on it.
Yeah, no verification.
Would that create it? I would actually say the bigger threat is people just being dishonest and saying, well, geez, I have these ballots, I might as well fill them out. I think that was the bigger problem in my take.
Yeah, well, with that, I'll tell you, here in Colorado, we were hailed as the gold standard after 2020, a big farce. My household, my son is now 25 and hasn't lived with us for many years, and he's made multiple requests to be taken off the rolls here, and we still get a ballot for him every election. It's really quite stunning.
I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
The bigger problem, too, was bundling. And this was some of the reports coming out where you had, James O'Keefe found evidence of the Somalians doing this, for example. He actually had video footage of a guy doing this. And there were other, Dinesh D'Souza talked about Mexican gangs that were doing this, his allegation. You had groups that were going door to door, illegal alien gang member shows up. Hey, have you been given ballots that aren't yours? We're collecting them. Mm. And these groups were collecting them. That should have been the biggest red flag.
Yeah, big time. Well, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us on Truth and Liberty today. It's been super enlightening, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. We wish you the best.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, wanted to remind you about our free product giveaway today. It's my booklet, The Calling to Manhood. If you'll share your email with us at truthandliberty.net, we'll get this right to you. Today in our culture, men are being told they need to be more like women and women like men. We don't know who we are or what we're about, but God has a purpose for both sexes. He made us male and female, and men need to rediscover what they're made for. So get a copy of that today. Go to truthandliberty.net. God bless you, and we'll see you again next time here on Truth and Liberty.